welcome to another live of Ken Reads, where Ken reads your ex for filth. I'm joking. I just gently tell my own 2 cents as to what happened in someone's life. And today, I'm taking a story from one of my followers who's shared their experiences of what they went through with their partner, who they believe has a pretty severe avoidant attachment style, and I'm very keen to read this out. And I want to add one dimension of this experience that's unique is the fact that there is the element of cultural background attached to this. So attachment theory goes international, in case anyone was wondering. These issues are not limited to just Western countries, I'm afraid. This sort of stuff is everywhere, and is very interesting how it plays out. So without further ado, I just want to let everyone know, I'm going to read this out. I don't have a lot of time for Q&A today, but if you do want to leave me some questions in the question mark box below, I will do my best to get through it at the end of the letter reading. Otherwise, let's get straight into it and find out what happened for one of my followers. So this follower, I'm going to call them Deepika, and we're going to hear what Deepika went through with her relationship. Okay, so Deepika says, we were close friends for over a year and dated for 6 months before we got married. I found this man intelligent, kind, and brilliant in his career. We enjoyed literature and culture together. His small group of friends and family adored him. He was the favorite uncle, very dutiful towards his family. His life was picture perfect. What drew me deeply was his containment of my big personality. My many troubles evoked the savior in him. I felt his deep adoration and compassion, which I have no doubt in my mind even now was genuine. He felt like a father I never had. He was my rock during a previous breakup and my mother's hospitalization. He knew from the beginning that I wanted to be married and have a child. He never thought of it and said he wants it because he loves me. Our marriage, a newborn, health emergencies, and to top it off, the pandemic changed everything. Our fights became intense. Sex got boring and hardly existed. He was shutting down, stonewalling, and there were multiple threats about divorcing me at every fight, which became the norm. I'd known him to solve everyone's issues, reach out and help, be calm and confident, but between us, he was collapsing and shutting down at every single fight or challenge. In my head, I believed that this must be what normal married life would be like. And I thought that if things continued, they might get better. So we went on a trip where he wanted to buy a farm in my name. We returned and he bought me jewelry. 3 months later, over a fight over who was bathing the baby, he asked for our divorce. He asked me to leave our marital home. When I returned to make peace, he stopped me at the door. He said this marriage was a mistake and he prefers to be a bachelor and that I'd be better off without him. We were hardly married for 2 years. He blocked me everywhere. He'd come home every weekend for our baby. His friends and family came to know of our separation months later when they probed me. He blocked them all rudely when they attempted to mediate. He continued to co-parent and provide for the child financially, but all my emails, attempts to talk, calls and letters were ignored. 18 months later, he agreed to meet me. I proposed starting afresh. He refused firmly. I resorted to divorce as the only way forward and invited him I invited him to discuss the terms. He refused to discuss divorce for the following 2 years, nor return my things at my marital home. It was mind-boggling why. I forever wondered if he's a narcissist, as it felt like he was spitefully delaying my divorce, but it just didn't add up. He seemed lost, defensive like a child, and silly during 4 court and lawyer mediations. He did not defend himself, nor tarnish my story in any way with anyone. He remained severely withdrawn from the outside world. For such an intelligent man, he blabbers when confronted and is inarticulate in discussing divorce. After 3+ years of maximum effort, I filed in court this week. He doesn't have a lawyer and asks for 50% of my child's custody. The laws in my country allow him only visitation rights, especially when the child is young. I'm a full-time mother and he works 6 days a week. So that's mind-boggling too. The child enjoys his father. The father is responsible towards the child's physical and logistical needs. I wonder how his parenting will span out with such severe avoidance. Will he deactivate on my child? How do I make sense of such contradictions? Will I ever come to terms with such a betrayal? What will my child's attachment be like under these circumstances? While I am deeply mind-boggled, this journey has been made somewhat bearable and understandable by attachment theory, and I can never thank you enough, Ken, for playing such an important role in this. Thank you very much. Your kind words are very much appreciated. All right, let's talk about Topeka's story. There's so much to say to what Topeka's gone through, and I want to start out by saying I am really sorry that you've had this experience, because when you're with someone who you've known, especially for over a year as a close friend, you generally get a sense of safety, trust, and when they're also helping you out when you've gone through a bad breakup, and they're supporting you through a myriad of challenges, and they feel like the father you never had, then of course a lot of us are going to think, oh, this person's just perfect. They're supportive. They're there for me. They've got my back. I don't have to worry. I can chill out now. This is going to be great. So I think it would understandably be really jarring that once marriage occurs and all these other issues are starting to come up where your partner is now engaging with you in seemingly very what I almost call superficial fights over such small things, threatening with divorce, and seemingly, just breaking down the relationship. This is where my brain goes, this feels very immature and it feels like a complete head fuck. And I know I say that a lot for these cases, but it's just wild to me how over these small things like bathing a child that you share together, that became the basis to break up a relationship and ask for a divorce. To me, it's sort of when I hear that, my brain goes, this is almost too silly to be narcissistic abuse. To me, even though it's abusive, it just seems to lack that Machiavellian element to it. It just comes across as being kind of dumb. It'd be like breaking up over someone who you've had a good relationship with because they haven't passed you the remote. Or if you've had a disagreement over what you want to eat for dinner. To me, it just seems so over the top. And it feels like, I suspect what was happening was, he was likely, if my interpretation is, I suspect this guy likely has strong dismissive avoidant tendencies. And I suspect what probably happened was, he was probably feeling more inadequate as the relationship went on, not feeling great about himself, and I suspect that he was probably not feeling good about marriage. The fact that he even said this was a mistake irrationally makes me think, okay, so he wasn't ready for commitment and love. It seems like he's much better off solving other people's problems, but when it comes to a real relationship, that freaks him out. And it sounds like it wouldn't surprise me if the people he likes helping out are people who have a lot of issues that are going on in their life, hence the way things were in the beginning of your relationship. And I believe he was genuine in wanting to help you out, but it seems like he likes people to be at a particular level. It wouldn't surprise me if he's the kind of guy who likes to help out people who seem helpless and can't help themselves, but he doesn't want to necessarily step up and be an equal partner in a relationship because it unsettles him. And I think that, what's really scary is the fact that for someone who seemingly was so into you, was so good as a friend well before you became intimate partners, how this all seems to switch very quickly around the time of marriage. That's scary as hell. And I think too, now this is a cultural point. I think in certain different cultures across the globe, and frankly, this can happen in Australia as well too, these dynamics are actually enabled and normed. It's almost like, we have our problems as couples. Marriages and relationships all have their issues. It's like, yeah, but what kind of issues are you having? If your issues are you're threatening divorce over a child being bathed, you've got serious issues. Frankly, relationships will have conflict over things that actually matter, but that seems like it's just way too far. I almost feel like, I wouldn't be surprised if your partner probably felt like, oh, we're having a fight. That means this isn't, a good relationship for me. It's like, no, you having a fight does not mean this is a bad relationship. To me, the themes that I get from this person are, they obviously are very emotionally immature. They couldn't handle dealing with the basic issues that come up in a relationship. I suspect this has a lot to do with low self-worth and low self-esteem, where he probably didn't feel like a good father and was also feeling terrible about himself, so he decided to end this the way that he did. And I also think too, the fact that he, interestingly, in the court cases that you had around divorce and discussing co-parenting, it's interesting how he seemed to just be at a loss of words for how to explain himself off the back of this, which makes me think, I don't think this guy has that bone in his body of trying to tarnish you or make it seem like, you're the problem. Like, I don't get the smear campaign aspect of this. To me, it just seems like he was at a loss for words and he didn't know how to express and communicate himself. Doesn't mean that his behavior wasn't bad. It certainly was. But it's just to say he seems like he's just lacking in being able to explain what the hell just happened. And it seems like he's probably very uncomfortable with it too. The fact that he also blocked your friends and family who tried to mediate and work through this just makes me think this man did not feel good about what happened. And I suspect that he probably felt quite insecure about the way in which this shutdown episode occurred. So yeah, this is very jarring sort of stuff where he presents really well, but beneath the surface at a much more subconscious level, oh boy, he seems like someone who really doesn't handle equal partnered relationships. He's more the kind of person who likes to give, but then he can't necessarily back it up when things start to get more real and equal with a romantic partner. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that whole experience. But as to your questions of, one of the questions was, how is this going to affect your child's attachment? Honestly, I mean, it could have a significant impact on your child who, may carry some of that betrayal and abandonment with them, down the line. But hey, that's what we're here for in therapy land. We like to help people who've gone through that to recover so it doesn't haunt them for the rest of their lives. It also depends on how you relate with your child too. But, I think that it'll be interesting to see how your partner goes in terms of being a dad to your child. And it'll be interesting to see if, he's able to maintain at least some connection with your child. But I suspect as your child gets older, he's just going to be very emotionally absent and not going to be there. He might be very good at, showing up in certain ways, but I suspect he's probably not going to be very good in the more intimate emotional moments where your child may want that close connection from them. That's my prediction on this entire thing as well too. I mean, he could deactivate and he could end up, having a shame spiral episode where he, blocks your daughter, your son, your child from ever seeing them again. But to me, I'm just thinking a lot of this just seems very irrational. It seems like he still wants to, have his cake and eat it too, be a dad, look after the child in a very superficial way, but not get emotionally close. So he's showing up in name only, but not necessarily, for an emotional connection. I don't think, based on this, I'm not going to say he sounds like a narcissist. He's behaved badly, but that's my interpretation of events. But yeah, I just think, Deepika, I'm very sorry that you've gone through that, but I will say you're not alone in having an experience like this. I know a lot of people across many parts of the globe have gone through very similar experiences where shit hit the fan post-marriage and some way into the relationship, even with people that they've known for a very long time. This sort of behavior is really mind-boggling and also very disruptive for a lot of reasons. And I can understand why people have tremendous fear to ever date again because they're worried, shit, will my partner just behave like this again? Is this what's going to happen? So it's really deeply painful. All right. I'm going to switch over now to Q&A. I'm going to answer some questions and I will let everyone know when I'm starting to round out because I do have other things that I need to do today. Let's get into it. So what do we got here? What actions can an avoidant partner take to gain back the trust of the partner they left? Oh, that is such a good question. They'd have to do a lot. If I were to ever consider dating my ex again, what I would want from them, at least to feel safe psychologically, is they've got an ongoing relationship with a therapist. They have an accountability team if they're going to shut down and also deactivate and screw around with a relationship because it's probably guaranteed. Like it's, there's so much stuff written about this that they need to have an accountability team in case that were to happen. I would also need them to have had some serious self-reflection to be like, yeah, I can say I have this fear of intimacy and I can see that I really need to work on this and I'm willing to take it slow with you because I know that my tendency is to rush, to be extremely intimate and I need to pace myself. I would also want to see over time how we navigate conflict. Are they going to freak out over, like I said before, what we're having for dinner? Or are they actually able to engage in a reasonable civil, discussion and conflict without personalizing it and having such a brittle ego that they're like, oh my God, if I'm not good enough for this relationship, then maybe I can't meet your needs and this is just not going to work out. Like if that's going to happen, I'm going to be like, well, look, I think you still have some stuff you need to work through. I think it's one of those things where it's hard to judge a lot of this change, immediately. But I have to say, I know for me, I don't think I'd feel safe. I think if I were to even go back to my ex, I mean, I honestly, I don't want to. Wish them the best. But, it's one of those things where I really just am in a very different place now in my life where I'm like, I'd rather not even think about dreading a potential shutdown episode because what's not resolved gets repeated. So, yeah, they would have to do tremendous amounts of work over a long period of time. Otherwise, hell no, I'm not accepting that. All right. If they said they've moved on, have they really moved on? I don't know how to stop ruminating about them. It's made worse with my ADHD. Believe me, I know how that feels, even though I'm not diagnosed with ADHD, but I know a lot of clients who are, and they understandably obsess and fixate on a lot of the details, and it does make things worse, and it is hard. So to answer the question, if they said they moved on, have they really moved on? To answer the question, in the immediate aftermath, depending on the context of the situation, sure, they have. But what is moving on really? Moving on, can mean so many different things. Does it mean that they no longer love you? Well, immediately post-breakup, no, they don't love you very much at all. In fact, they're like, yep, I'm out, bye, because they feel relief that they've made a decision that they believe has benefited themselves. However, we know that for a lot of these people that they do often feel guilt, shame, and miss you after the fact, and that can take sometimes a few days or weeks or months for fearful avoidance, but for dismissives, it can be anywhere to 2 years or more. So it depends from person to person. If by moving on, will they move on to be with a new partner? That is highly likely because a lot of them do this in order to feel better about themselves, to have a fresh start. Did they, have they moved on in terms of processing their emotions for you? No. No. These people are the masters of compartmentalization and have not usually worked on themselves to such a state that they have been able to overcome a lot of this stuff. As one user here has said, my therapist called it moving on, but he did a 360. Sorry, he did not call it a moving on, but did a 360, starting the cycle over again. I love that. That's exactly right. Or as one other user very astutely said, it's not moving on, it's moving forward. It's not taking the time to learn from the experience, alchemize the pain, work through the grief, understand where you went wrong in this experience. It's just, I'm going to skip that step entirely and miss the lessons involved with that and go to the next person. That's why that kind of bypassing is really dangerous to a person's development, because then they're just not learning how they behaved and messed up in that experience as well too. So to answer your question, have they really moved on? Well, I guess in one sense they have, but in a lot of others, no. I think that given the stage where you're at, because it sounds like even with your experience with ADHD and the fact that you're ruminating quite hard on this, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that is to do with a very, very nasty case of what I call the what if monster. What if there was someone else? What if they'll forget about me? What if they'll never come back around and ever see me again? What if this is the last time that I'll ever see a person like this again? The what if monster is disgusting. And even though it's trying to help you by thinking about worst case scenarios to manage, it misfires hard in these cases to make you panic about a lot of stuff. And it can get even worse when you have maybe a predilection for obsessing over the finer details of things, and you need a lot of certainty to manage internal anxiety. But a lot of that stuff is, you'll get to a point where eventually you may not find you're being beaten up by the what if monster. It will fade over time, but yeah, I'd say you're in a pretty awful stage of it right now, but things will ease eventually. But right now you're probably in a bad phase and it's just shitty. I would say you probably need to start speaking to survivors off the back of this experience, hearing their stories, listen to what they've been through and go through it. Hell, I reckon if I just throw this out to the crowd that are here, I'm going to throw this out. Has anyone here, experienced a case of whether or not their avoidant ex had moved on? Feel free to detail what moving on meant for your avoidant ex in the chat below, because I think it would actually be very interesting to see what people have to say about this, because I know for me, mine was just said to me, didn't want a relationship, bounced into one shortly after the fact too, even though I know when I caught up with them again out of, off the back of our relationship, They were very into me, and I was like, this feels inappropriate given the fact that I know you're in a new relationship and you said you didn't want to be with me. So just want to say, partially had moved on, but not really. So yeah, that's my answer to that. All right. Is it normal for someone with an avoidant attachment to block you slowly over multiple social media platforms instead of all at once? And what is the reason for this? Yes, this is actually very normal, particularly for fearful avoidance. So to kind of explain why this happens, what I found is when a fearful avoidant who has huge core wounds of being defective, of being a bad person, gets triggered, breaks up with you, they feel really shitty about themselves because they know they've usually done a bad thing. However, they built up defenses to protect themselves from feeling guilty and shameful. They've usually come from very emotionally manipulative parents who guilt tripped them and made them feel bad. So what happens is that they will then, if they feel guilt and shame, a lot of them will project that onto you. And anytime they feel bad, they will rationalize and go, they're making me feel this way. They're the problem. They're the needy one. They're the issue. So rather than having a very logical, well thought out, this is just not a healthy relationship for me, I need to, go no contact by blocking them everywhere. What's often happening is they will see you on social media because they miss you, even if they're aware of it or not. Then they'll feel shitty about themselves. Then they will block you to defend themselves from feeling bad. Then a few days, weeks, months later, they'll do the same thing. They'll scour you on somewhere like LinkedIn and do the same thing there as well too. A lot of this is done to protect themselves from intense feelings of guilt and shame. So just want to say, in this particular context, it is quite common for fearful avoidant attachers to do this, to protect themselves from feeling intense guilt and shame. And frankly, it's a really, really dodgy way of handling their emotions. I want to make a moment here to say, fearful avoidants, I find, whilst have a tremendous capacity to hold space for others, have an alarmingly problematic relationship with their emotions, where they think being triggered is an intuitive nudge from the universe that says this isn't right for me. A lot of them often will say a lot of therapeutic sounding terms like, we're just not in energetic alignment if I feel this way. And they'll say it like they're really agitated and angry, or they might even send these really long ranty text messages explaining their decision as to why they shouldn't be connected with you anymore, saying that, you're so controlling and I need to protect my space by having better boundaries between us. I'm here for you if you ever have an emergency, but I just think we need to part ways right now. It's very controlling. It's very, it's very self-righteous. I'm here for you if you need me. It's listen, real closure means there ain't no seeing you even if there is emergency ever again. It's done. There's no people pleasing and laying down people gently. These people can be very confusing because on one hand, they offer you, a slightly, diseased olive branch, but then come back often at times to try and re-engage with you and try and act as if nothing ever happened between the two of you and before going through the cycle again. And I find that this is really mind-bogglingly damaging to their partners. And when they can't discern that, it's listen, if you're feeling angry, shameful, and guilty about something, it doesn't mean your partner is a bad partner necessarily. Discernment, please. If you're having a healthy relationship with someone and you're feeling that, it's likely that you're triggered and it's brought up memories of your past. Doesn't mean it's your partner's fault. So just want to say, please be mindful that triggers do not equal those more quiet, intuitive nudges of this doesn't feel quite right. So that's why I think you've just got to be mindful of it. I can see someone here says, you're right, I'm a fearful avoidant, and I used to do that, unfortunately. I just want to say, thank you for your self-awareness. I get why it happens. I'm not here to shame you and slap you on the face, be don't you fucking do that. I know it's protective. I get that aspect. Not great if you do it because it hurts a lot of people too, especially if you're on the receiving end of it. But I'm just saying that, yes, this is common fearful avoidant attacher behavior, and it's very painful to be on the receiving end of. So yeah. All right, next question. My 7-year relationship ended, and it has left me feeling so confused and as if I was hit, and I was part of a hit and run accident. I don't blame you for feeling that way. There was no communication, there was breadcrumbing, and it was really kind of cruel. Was he even real? It's scary. I feel so lost and joyless. Nothing makes sense. Okay. So given where you're at, I want to start out by saying I'm really sorry that this is where you're at right now, because I think that first month or so off the back of this is incredibly earth-shattering, and it does probably feel like I don't even know what's real anymore. Like, I just had a 7-year relationship and now all of a sudden it's gone. Who was this person? How can I trust love again? I feel so unsafe now off the back of this experience. Very valid to be experiencing that. Shock is so real off the back of this. Many people, with all due respect, don't maybe have a full comprehension with how people can have, and I'm using this word very loose. Actually, let's not use that word because it would just be misleading. People are very unaware of the fact that we can all have multiple sides to us that show up due to trauma, stress, a variety of circumstances. So for people to kind of get out of the fact that it's like, okay, your partner and how they're presenting is not always an accurate reflection of how they're going to be throughout all instances of life. It's freaky when all of a sudden you've had a partner who loved you for 7 years suddenly does this to you. It's like, where was this? And I obviously don't know the full context of your experience, whether this was a gradual or a sudden, departure of character for your partner. But I am here to say that, it's very normal, I think, for you to just feel like, I don't even know if I knew this person and I can't even trust myself again off the back of it. Very normal, very common for so many people to be like, where the fuck do I go from here and what the fuck just happened? Now, again, I don't know the full context of your experience too. You mentioned how, where is it? You're feeling really confused as if you were part of a hit and run accident. Yeah, no kidding. Because I think that's a really beautiful way of describing it, because I think a lot of it is you're invited to go to an amazing experience with someone. There's a lot of future faking and a lot of promises to make a relationship work before they run you over with the getaway car and they leave you with no opportunity to find out what the F just happened. So I think that is part of it. Was it real? I don't know the full context of your experience. I'd say parts of it most certainly were, and parts were probably, tucked away. But as for feeling lost and joyless, unfortunately, it is what it is. And you're probably feeling a lot of sadness and depression right now, which is totally normal off the back of this. You're probably feeling incredibly broken, and I'm sorry that you're going through this because it is an incredibly damaging experience. And I've got to be honest, you will probably not be the same way off the back of this. Not necessarily in a bad sense. Many people who often survive off the back of this do transform and become much wiser, grounded, and more emotionally available people. But the stage to getting there, you're probably going to feel like the worst version of yourself right now. So it's understandable you feel probably like a puddle on the floor. In fact, if anyone has listened to Olivia Rodrigo's Good For You, where there's like a lyric in there which says, I've lost my mind crying on the floor of my bathroom. Very common, been there, done that. I think I added to the water bill that month with my own share of liquids coming from me. So just saying, I get it for people who are there. All right. Next question. My ex moved on with someone 13 years younger than him 2 months after breakup, even got engaged to her. So it's been 2 years since the breakup and he started cyber stalking me. He constantly looks at my stories and he doesn't even follow me. Harmless, but why is he doing this? Because he still wants access to you, because he still misses you, but he's not going to act on that. He's probably doing that from a safe distance to still see what's going on in your life because he hasn't processed his emotions around you. If you were to confront him about this and you also, had a moment where you were like, what the hell is going on here? He would flat out deny it, probably block you, or just be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Most of them do not want to admit, oh shit, I still have feelings for you. And even if he did, it's Phantom X sort of stuff. Does it mean the feelings of when you're in Phantom X zone aren't real? No, it could mean they're very real. But the key thing to understand is that if you have an avoidant ex who's stalking you on socials, especially now that we're with someone new, that is a red flag for everyone involved, especially the new person. There was someone who's technically cheating on them, even if it's like to a small degree, because they've obviously got feelings for you that they're still acting on, and they're not taking the accountability to be like, I have a problem and I need to confront my partner about this and probably have a conversation with my ex and get through some unresolved feelings. Better yet, go to therapy, get your closure. But no, this is a case of having his cake and eating it too, or their cake and eating it too. I don't know the gender of your partner. So, I'd say that's probably more about them. But yeah, don't expect anything particularly amazing to come off the back of that. My fearful avoidant ex has blocked me on social media. No contact for 2 months, yet she interacts with my sister on Instagram. What the fuck and why? This is going to be a similar answer to my previous one. So, whilst there's a similar degree of what was going on in... Sorry, can I just take a moment to say, someone just said in relation to the previous question about why is my ex who's with a new partner cyber stalking me? Someone here has said their honeymoon phase probably ended. And I think that's very accurate. So yeah, it suggests to me that, the avoidant ex is shutting down and is probably not, is probably looking for deactivating strategies. So that's funny. Sorry, let's go back to the current question of why is my ex interacting with my sister? What's going on there? So this sometimes happens, particularly with fearful avoidance. What they will do is they'll still try and linger with your friendship circle, or they'll try and create like a narrative around what happened to get support and sympathy for what they've been through. So you may find that they're spending copious amounts of time with friends and family, disrespecting your boundaries because they still want a degree of access to you, but they also want to justify what happened with their behavior to make them feel better about the whole situation. They may even reach out to your mother to try and get, someone to listen to them too. Many of these people are looking for excessive validation at this stage to justify their frankly bad behavior and to make it out like, maybe you were the problem, you're a narcissist, you've done something wrong. Many of them will throw the narcissist card around, this is the fearful avoidance, mind you, just to justify what happened. Many of them have grown up with a covert narcissist. So when they get triggered and feel like they're being guilt tripped, not from a place of genuine guilt tripping, they will then throw into, you're a narcissist, you're doing this to me, you're manipulating me, when it's like, no, you just got triggered. And this person's frankly quite normal compared to the people you had when you were growing up too. So just putting it out there and saying this is probably part of their way of trying to cope with what just happened by still having access to you, getting their story right to manage their guilt and shame, but also probably they're still very confused and reeling off the back of their, let's just say, not the best decision making. But yeah, just be mindful. That does happen quite a lot, unfortunately. And it's not really, for them, it's part of their stuff that they've got to work through. And it also shows how they don't often have a lot of closure. It can be very hard for them to create proper closure with previous partners too. Dismissive avoidance, less so. I find they're better off at distancing themselves and, leaving entirely, but they don't deliver closure very well a lot of the time. All right. I think I'm an avoidant, and my ex was too. During the end of the relationship, I guess it faded a little bit for me, but when he broke up with me, it triggered me a lot and felt like the worst breakup ever. This is so confusing. That is actually quite common. So even though in attachment literature, we'll often say avoidance and anxious attachers get together because they obviously have shared wounds that are getting activated by each other, which is true. That does happen a lot. But lest we forget that many avoidant attachers do come together and it is incredibly unsettling for them because often they feel like I've seen a mirror of myself. Sorry guys, I had connection issues. A lot of the time they'll have had a moment where they've interacted with someone who is highly avoidant and it freaks them out because they're like, where did this come from? I wasn't expecting this. This is really jarring. And it may be the wake-up call they've needed to be like, holy shit, I can see I behave that way, but this really sucks and really hurts. And then that brings up a whole new layer of guilt where they're like, I've really fucked up with previous relationships, and they almost can't hide from what they've done before as well too. Doesn't mean they'll necessarily work on themselves, but it is one of those things where it can become really brutal and painful for them. So long story short, I'd say if you are someone who identifies with an avoidant attachment and you've been with someone who had an even greater avoidant attachment than yours, don't worry, you're not alone. It does happen a lot, but it can be very confusing. And frankly, there's not a lot of literature out there for people who've actually been the avoidant with a mega avoidant. It's usually just, as we understand, anxious and avoidance who get together and this sort of stuff happens. But yeah, it does happen for a lot of avoidance too. And it's interesting how they sometimes deal with it. Sometimes they almost under-process it and go, that was weird. And then other times they'll really spiral quite hard. Depends from person to person. All right, next question. Let's see. Is there a new way to vet a new partner to determine whether they could up and leave without warning? No. I'm being serious. I don't have a criteria to be like, this person's definitely going to break up with you. But as a counselor, often when I'm listening to my clients' stories, there are a few things that I've heard where I'm like, this is starting to raise my spidey senses, and I'll share some of those things with you now. It's harder. Look, the reason I say no off the bat is because it's hard in the beginning to know this. You almost have to go through it a few more times to be like, oh, now I get it. And I can see what I'm going through. Not that I know many people would want to ever go through that again. Don't worry. It's usually not as bad the second or third time around. You usually get to a point where you're like, okay, I knew what that was. What I find is that one of the key things for a lot of avoidants when they're dating you is intensity, rushing. A lot of they often will look really, really good, and it may present like they're actually really good on paper. And often I find that a lot of the time, they might say things like, oh, I really like this connection. I don't want to rush it. But then subsequently initiate wanting to have sex with you and to do all this really romantic stuff. They tend to break their own boundaries. They kind of come across as a bit of a love addict in the beginning, where it's almost like they can't help themselves be with you. They don't respect their own boundaries. They certainly don't respect taking it slower and pacing it as well too. I often find that if you've engaged with one of these people for quite some time, you'll notice a few things, like when you're trying to have an emotional conversation with them about something deep and meaningful, they may say things like, yeah, I don't know how to express my emotions. And that for me is a glaring red flag, because I'm like, if you have alexithymia, this could be problematic. Not because people who have alexithymia are bad people. They're certainly not. But if you can't communicate your emotions, to me, my brain goes, okay, we're only going to be able to have a very superficial relationship because I need you actually to communicate the tough shit. And if you can't do that, we've got issues. And I want to make this very clear. If any of you have experiences of alexithymia, does not mean you're not relationship worthy. You most absolutely are. It's just important to understand that if you have this experience of alexithymia where you can't connect and or express your emotions, you may struggle when the demands of someone who needs that are something you can't necessarily connect with. So just want to say that up front. The other problem I find too in usually the early stages of dating as well is they may be very conflict averse. You find that when you're trying to sort something out with them, they can oscillate between being very passive and just doing whatever you want them to do, or they don't really engage with the conflict at hand, or they might break up with you suddenly, which obviously isn't a sign of an impending breakup if it's happening to you all at once. I often find that if you listen to their stories of previous exes, they almost gloss over it and then give very superficial answers, where it's just like, it's almost like all of their exes were just, not compatible. And I mean, on paper, that sounds logical, but something will be like, but why weren't they compatible? And they might say things like, I didn't see a future with my partner. I'm here to let you know that anyone who says, I didn't see a future with my partner needs a lot of unpacking. What the heck does that mean? Frankly, I don't often know what's best for me in my own future, and I'm pleasantly surprised when I challenge myself to new things. So for someone to just be like, oh, I couldn't see them in my future, it makes me think, that sounds like a very anxiety-based comment to make. To me, it just sort of makes me think, where did that come from? I don't understand what that means, so please tell me more. You may find that if you probe more into their past relationships, they become very guarded and walled, and they're it's very hard for them to actually open up about stuff. And it's like, okay, if I'm trying to love you better to understand how you acted in previous relationships and this is how you're responding, is this a bit of a taste of what's going to come going forward? So, there's that. I can see someone here's asked, which is relevant to this piece too, which is how to know if it's alexithymia or they're just trying not to give exact reasons to avoid conflict. Keeps on saying, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to share a very blunt opinion. Frankly, it's usually both. If someone is experiencing alexithymia and cannot articulate their emotions, what are the chances they're going to necessarily be able to connect with that core reason as to why something didn't work out? I have so many clients who can't connect with their emotions where they've said to me, I don't know why this has happened. Now, the I don't know, as a clinician, it can be a frustrating thing to hear because you're like, great, well, I guess we've just got to circle around the topic again. And that's how it usually goes. But I want to be very clear. There's a difference between someone saying, I genuinely don't know what the reason is, and that does happen every now and then, versus someone who constantly says that when you're actually probing on something that is very real, and it's defensive, I don't know why that is. And for a lot of these people, they're just not ready to go deeper than that. It's too hard for them. It's too painful. I get it. it's hard. But if someone's saying that sort of stuff to you, I tell you what, even the best therapist is going to probably spend years working with a client before they're like, yeah, actually, I do know why. I've just been saying that because I just don't feel comfortable just expressing the reality of the situation just yet. So not helpful is what I'm going to say. Look, like I said, everyone is at different stages. Everyone probably has different needs for what they're looking for in a relationship. If you're young, at a different stage of development, the I don't knows are probably not going to seem like a major deal breaker. And frankly, it's probably going to work for some people where they're like, don't need to know your past. It's totally fine. But I think a lot of you who watch my stuff are looking for something more meaningful and are certainly not looking to go back through an experience like this again, where you get, your heart broken. And you probably do want to feel like I can trust my partner and myself to know how to navigate the situation. So that's why I want to say, if you're someone who is looking for psychological safety and not looking to be too vulnerable, then a person who's alexithymic might actually be quite handy because it's actually quite safe and also healing in some ways because you're like, oh, thank God, this is the kind of relationship that I want. But if you're dating someone who, is at that stage and you're at a completely different stage where you require emotional connectedness and depth, we've probably got an issue here. Once again, it is just simply different strokes for different folks. One is not necessarily worse than the other, but we all have different relational needs depending on our stage of where we're at in our life. Some people will be at one stage, other people will be at others, and other people will grow over time. So, it is what it is. Anyways, let's keep going. I'm a year and a half post-abrupt breakup and I'm still struggling to heal even with the help of therapy. Are there any strategies that can be helpful to move forward from the loss and betrayal? Without knowing your case in particular, I often find that there are a few things I see with clients who are still struggling to get over a breakup is often, one, there's too many people telling you, you need to move on and you need to rush through this. Don't even do that. One key thing I always tell my clients is if you're still in grieving mode and you're still feeling upset about this, please grieve the heck out of this. Talk about how much you love them. Write out letters to them. Do voice messages that you send to yourself. Allow yourself to grieve the love you have with this person. It is so important to honor the fact that you still probably want to hold on to this person and because they might still feel like an amazing human being to you. That is a phase. It will come and go. And then eventually you'll get to a phase of anger where you're like, screw that. I didn't deserve to be treated that way. But I'm guessing there's probably still a bit of resistance there. I often ask my clients okay, if you're struggling to move forward, what's keeping you there? And frankly, a lot of people will just simply say, I'm not ready to let go. I love that answer because it's really helpful because it just makes me think we're not touching that today. That needs to be just respected. The other thing too is I often find there's really nasty inner critic stuff that happens. So often we have a part of ourselves that cuts us down, tells us we're too needy, that we're too much. Or in these cases, if you don't move on, you're going to be like all those other people who never get over their exes. That couldn't be further from the truth. People take their own time to heal and grieve off the back of this. So it's really important to challenge that inner critic and be like, in my own time, thank you. This isn't helpful. A little easier said than done. And there's plenty of things I could teach people on how to do inner critic stuff. But it's really important to challenge your own thinking when you're going through a breakup like this because we can be our own worst enemies and get in our own way. Another thing that I also think is really important is also taking the time to go back over the facts and to look at the relationship in a less glowy light if you feel it. It's really important to look back and go, okay, what were the parts of this experience that were not up to scratch? Even if it was just the breakup. Did you like how you were broken up? How did it feel to be treated that way? How did it feel to not even be communicated properly? Or if you were communicated with, how did they communicate that breakup with you? Did it necessarily feel right to you? Because a lot of the time, there's a way to do a manageable breakup with a relationship versus just unilaterally ending things without involving you. So that's another thing to think about too. The other thing I'm going to say too is that if you've had a history of betrayal, then that's probably also going to come out in this experience as well too. Many of us have had bad experiences with childhoods where there may have been betrayal of a close friend, maybe at school or something like that. And so this can just be another wound that gets reopened off the back of this experience. I don't know your case specifically. I would probably need to speak to you myself, which I can't due to my constraints at the moment. But I would think that it would be best to also think about too the therapeutic relationship. Not to say that your therapist is doing a bad job by any means necessary, but maybe even communicate that to your therapist if you haven't already, saying, I feel stuck. I feel like, there's some resistance, and maybe explore like where that resistance is at. Because I often find it's really helpful in those moments where if you feel stuck and you understand what's making you stuck, that can often be the step to help you move forward through this. Lastly, I just want to say, for some people, you may need medication. I don't always advocate for things like antidepressants or anything like that, or anti-anxiety medication or anything like that. My attitude is that if those emotions are just too intense for you to handle at that particular point in time, and you're not able to access that more rational brain, I just want to say, take the time to maybe consider having some supplementary medication to help ease you out of it, because that can be a big difference in your recovery journey if you find that it's of help. I will be honest and say I never did. I didn't find the need to do that, thankfully, but that doesn't mean that people don't. And I've seen a lot of people who do find it really helpful to help them be like, okay, I got my mind back and I can see things differently now and I can start to work through this. Bear in mind, those emotions will eventually return and you'll need to work through them, but usually the heat of it has been taken away and it's easier now because your brain's not attacking you as much. So it does help, it can help in the long run. Again, I cannot prescribe medication. I am not someone who's clinically trained in that particular way, but I am here to just say sometimes it helps. Putting that out there and saying might be helpful for you too. All right, next question. Can avoidance already self-reflect during a breakup? My ex broke up with me out of the blue and told me that she would regret it someday, and it breaks her heart, but something is missing. Short answer is yes, they can. I've even heard one case where the avoidant actually opened up and said, when I told you that I was breaking up with you because, you're too combative, I actually meant to say I broke up with you because I was so scared that if we got together, you would see how pathetic I am and you would leave me. So yes, it is possible, but will it change the outcome? No, because often even in spite of knowing where this is all coming from, their need to run feels so much greater in order to protect themselves. I will say that's a very interesting thing to say, that they both on one hand say, there's something missing here, yet I'm going to regret this in the future. To me, it really demonstrates how there's a lot of internal conflict around, on one hand, knowing that this is going to suck and it's going to hurt for them to feel this way, yet somehow believing that there's something missing in the relationship. Suggests to me this isn't the first time that they've actually gone through this experience before. Suggests to me that they haven't resolved the issue that they've had in the first place. And it also suggests to me that if they are aware of it, I'm going to just be honest, they're being abusive. First time around with a fear of intimacy, I am not going to blame anyone. With all due respect, yes, it's painful, but we all hurt each other within reason the first time around, okay? Take accountability, responsibility, not okay, great, learn not to do it again. So if you're someone who's now done this a second time going on and you already know that you've experienced this and you know that this is going to hurt for you and for the other person, that is an entirely different talking matter. At that point, I'm like, sorry, we now need to have a serious chat about accountability, and that is not okay. The first time I will give you as a counselor, you don't have to do this to anyone who's listening to me. I'll give you a pass. Okay, you didn't know what you didn't know. But if you're an avoidant attacher with a fear of intimacy, where you know this hurts others, you know you have this problem, and you do not have a care team around you to support you with this, you are significantly hurting other people now, and by definition, you are being abusive. So just saying that is something that I take very seriously, and you need to think about one's role in that particular dynamic. All right, just a few more, and then I'm going to wrap up for the day. Let's see. Ex grew up largely not knowing either parent. She ended our relationship to return to the father of her children, who was an addict. She said it's best for the kids to know their dad despite his issues. What role did her background factor into things? A lot. So that sounds to me like a fearful avoidant. So the reason I say that is because a lot of fearful avoidant attachers have come from very chaotic backgrounds where usually one or more parents are at least an addict or have personality issues as well as mental health issues. When you are someone who's growing up in an environment where there's moments of intense affection and love bombing with absence and distraction, where they're blasting on drugs or they're, constantly hooking up with new people and there's lots of disruptions, that means that for a child, their sense of what love is subconsciously is chaos. For them, the addict as a partner is safer than genuinely healthy love. Does it make any logical sense? Hell no. But this is what feels comfortable to this person. Dating the addict is what's familiar from their childhood background. Dating you is a threat, even though in real terms, you're probably not a threat at all. It's just uncomfortable because this is an analogy I've been using recently, but when lottery winners win millions of dollars, often that money goes very quickly. Why? Well, even though $1 million is objectively high value, most people can't actually handle $1 million unless their nervous system is wired for it. Most people can't even handle $100. The fact of the matter is that just like money, people who've never actually been wired for safety often have a lot of resistance to how safety feels, because it's like, I've only ever known chaos and abuse, and now you're expecting my body to suddenly adjust to this sort of foreign thing that you call safe. Don't think so. I'll take the devil I know versus the devil I don't. Now, is this a conscious thing? Much of the time, no. It's often the body's way of reacting to something that feels alien, unusual, and life-threatening. It's not a very conscious process, and I am not making excuses for these people's behavior. I am simply saying this is just the way the nervous system works. So it is what it is, unfortunately, and it can be quite jarring for a lot of people, understandably. All right, let's see. What else have we got here? I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to call it a day. I think I've answered all of these questions that are on here. That's great. Okay, cool. I'm going to do one more from the chat, and then I'm going to call it a day. Let's see. What else have we got here? If anyone is keen to just throw a question quickly into the chat, go for it, because I'll call it a day otherwise. Let's see if I can find one really quickly. Otherwise, I'm just going to journey straight down. Okay, I'm going to just go to the bottom of the chat and see if anyone's thrown a question in randomly. Oh, here we go. Why did my ex ask for her useless stuff back exactly a year after our breakup? She went straight to her ex after. It could be an issue of control in that she wants to feel a sense of ownership over her possessions again. Even if those possessions were useless, it might be a bit of a pride thing. I notice a lot of fearful avoidants can be very self-righteous, and that they want to feel like, I'm having the last word. I feel like I'm in control of the situation. So even if those objects are of no inherent value whatsoever, maybe it was a point of pride for them to feel like, I'm in control of this situation and I'm taking my stuff back from you. Kind of like, I'm the big boy or girl who's championing themselves after leaving this horrible experience, and I'm proving you what a terrible person you are by taking my stuff back. It's all ego-based at that stage, I would say. And a lot of that stuff I feel like is coming from a place of someone who's very immature, who's trying to punish you for their own crappy behavior. That's how I would take it. All right, everybody, thank you as always for joining this live. I hope that this was of value to those of you. And Deepika, thank you very much for sharing your story with us as well too. Like I said, attachment issues run internationally. It ain't just something that happens in Western countries. And it's often enabled and fostered by people in different, cultures and communities as well too, without even realizing it. So yeah, all right. Much love to everyone here. I hope you're all going well with regards to everything that you're going through. And I will be back again next week with more lives, and I'll put out some more content before the end of my work week.